Welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. New shirt. My wife made me this piratey shirt, big poofy sleeves and all, and I love it. It's going to be part of the Uncle Drac ensemble, and I'd wear this every day if I could. I've asked her she'll make me 5 more. I got a really unusual look, so that might not happen. I asked for suggestions on my last video of things you might like to hear me talk about, and YouTube user Ren asked for my top 10 fantasy movies and why. So I started listing them and I just couldn't come up with only 10. So here is my +1 list of my top 10 fantasy movies and why they are my top 10 +1. They are ranked in order. It's not so much quality or really if I like them or not. It's the order in which they catch me. If I'm walking through a room and they're on a television screen, how likely am I to put everything else down and stop and watch the whole movie? I'm going to start with number 10. The 1986 classic Labyrinth, starring David Bowie from the Jim Henson Company. It's not my usual kind of fantasy movie. There's not a lot of swashbuckling, swordplay, what have you, Sir Didymus notwithstanding, but it is such an amazing display of acting, of talent, of contact juggling, of David Bowie singing talent, and that miraculous Jim Henson magic, the environments and the puppets, and the parts where the puppets are the environment and vice versa. Love it for its look, its feel, its technical brilliance. Number 9. 1998. The Stormriders, starring the immortal Sonny Chiba as Lord Conquer. This is one that you might not have caught. It's a Japanese Hong Kongish action movie starring a couple of rock stars, not necessarily actors, not even action movie actors or stuntmen, but music performers who were popular enough to be cast in this over-the-top, balls-out, wire-fu, kung-fu masterpiece. Swordplay, martial arts, magic, training montages, monsters, and Sonny Chiba as a character named Lord Conquer. It doesn't get much better than that. It's overly complex and a little bit longer than it needs to be, and branches off in directions that it probably didn't need to. There's a shorter version. I still prefer the longer version just for all of the detail that they throw into it. A little gruesome at points, but it's a blood and guts fantasy film. It's kind of what it's got to be. Number 8. 1955. Danny Kaye stars in The Court Jester. It's not a traditional fantasy movie. It's not a sword and sorcery epic. It's somewhere on the border between a historical drama and a musical comedy, and I love it. It has some of the best on-screen swordplay ever captured between Danny Kaye and Basil Rathbone. The movie was made mostly because Danny Kaye wanted to toe off against Basil Rathbone on screen, and Danny Kaye was closer to his prime and Basil was having a little time keeping up, but there's magic and swordplay and beautiful locations and knights and lightning and if you've never heard the pellet with the poisons and the vessel with the pestle, but the chalice from the palace is the brew that is true, you need to sit down and watch this movie. Number 7, 1981's Excalibur. Beginning of the 80s, and this defined what fantasy movies were going to look like forever. The story of King Arthur and the Round Table told in grim and gritty high fantasy gleaming armor fashion. No holds barred violence, no holds barred sex, all used to forward the story exactly as it meant to be, showing how brutal the legend of King Arthur could really be, and showing it in its pageantry and squalor, the grime and the blood and the glory. It very emotionally impacted movie. I saw it when I was probably too young to see it. I saw it in 1981, but it gripped me. It held me. I'm not by nature a bigger fan of fantasy than I am of other genres. I'm a science fiction guy, but Excalibur grabbed me, and if I've got a love for things fantasy, and I do, then that movie has a lot to do with it. 1982. Number 6, The Sword and the Sorcerer. What Excalibur did for known legends and the Arthurian mythos, The Sword and the Sorcerer did for shit that just got made up. It didn't have a mythos that it drew from. It crafted its own. Not writ large, but through the eyes of one hero and his adventures. And it was cool. Oh my god, it was cool. And the Talon with this 3-bladed sword, 2 of which you could fire off and they would regrow over a day or so. And the Sorcerer with his glowing evil heart rip out spells. And now that I think about it, it's pretty much a retelling of Yojimbo, like so many of my favorite movies are. But man, so well done, so 80s. Everything about it is 80s and over the top, and stuff that should never work. Stuff that if you went to one of the modern sword makers like Tony Swatton and said, I want to have a sword that does this, or a sword that looks like this, a functional sword that is like this, and be told, well, no one could ever do that. That was never historical, and it's unrealistic, and you'd never be able to wield it properly. And they made it work. It looked good. Yeah. Sword and the Sorcerer. Gotta catch that one. Number 5, 1977's The Hobbit by Rankin Bass Animation Studios. Not the more recent. I could have done 7 movies just going to the Peter Jackson stuff, but it's on everyone's top 10 list. Not mine. They're good, but I've seen them. They're recent. I'm going for my more nostalgic feelings about these movies. My top 10 fantasy. And the animated Hobbit film. Oh. The music hits me first. Not just the lyrics and the songs that had lyrics, but the background music and the incidentals and the sound design. And then you've got that old-timey, almost wood print character design, so close to the original illustrations for Tolkien's work, and the voice work. It all worked very well. I've read The Hobbit, and I've read a lot of Tolkien. The Hobbit is kind of the start of this huge journey, and something that you can pick up and read over not all that long. And this animation captured it so well. the characters and the flow of the story and the little asides of the camera, which supposedly broke the fourth wall, but at the same time they gave it such a feeling of life and personality, and it was those very true to the book characters that were talking to me. Absolutely loved it. Still do. I will stop and watch that anytime I see it. If I can find the incidental music out there, I will probably get it in an MP3 and put it on a playlist, because that's some of the music of my childhood and imagination. Number 4, 2008's The Forbidden Kingdom. An American film featuring a number of Asian actors, and as an American film it is somewhat forgettable. It's like a better remake of Warriors of Virtue, which I can't stand. I don't mind the kangaroo characters. It was the cinematography that just turned me off of that one. Forbidden Kingdom did it all correctly. Kid from modern day gets transported back into ancient times, and there's fantasy stuff, and Jackie Chan and Jet Li in the same movie, and they've got a fight scene. Just the two of them. I don't have to go any further than that. Jackie Chan versus Jet Li. I'll watch the whole movie just to see that scene. I'll watch the story and everything that carries on, and there's some excellent action throughout the entire thing. Jackie Chan versus Jet Li. I'm a fight scene guy. My imagination operates almost 90% in fight scenes. Jackie Chan versus Jet Li. Yeah, number 4, for a reason. Number 3, also from 1982, Like the Sword and the Sorcerer, and Like the Sword and the Sorcerer, an over-the-top gonzo fantasy epic based entirely in its own mythos. This one, however, from England. And if you have never seen it and are a fan of fantasy, you must find and watch Hawk the Slayer. It is the archetypical Dungeons and Dragons adventure movie. It's whereas the Sword and the Sorcerer had one hero and the female protagonist and a couple of characters around them, but it was all about this one guy with this sword with 3 blades. Hawk the Slayer is literally the hero gathers a party of adventurers. He's got the dwarf, the elf, the giant, and they do incredible things through the power of bravery and will and jump cuts, and Jack Palance as the villain. It's stylish and iconic. You watch it and you want to roll dice. It is one of the most inspirational fantasy movies I may ever have seen. I got the soundtrack. Soundtrack's friggin' awesome. Zamfir does parts of the soundtrack. Master of the Pan Flute, look him up. Yeah. Hawk the Slayer. See it. Number 2. 1982 was such a good year for fantasy movies, but there was never one like before or since Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal. It was moody and brooding and dark. And done entirely with Muppets, puppets, costume pieces. No human ever seen on the screen. again, technically brilliant. It was marketed to children, but it wasn't a children's movie. It was a movie for a mature audience. I saw it when I was a child, and I appreciated it. Oh. I've got the special edition box set. I haven't opened it. I don't know how I can face that sheer emotional rush. A story very well told, visually incredible, with elements of fantasy and horror intermingled so beautifully by the Jim Henson Company, by that vision. I wish it had done better theatrically, because they just poured their mind and heart onto the screen, and you can see that. Funny moments, interesting moments, engaging moments. Again, its own mythology. It makes you think. It makes you learn it as you go along, and you don't mind because you're drawing in all these details. And what does this tell me about this world and about these people and about this past? And it's almost a post-apocalyptic view of this fantasy world. And it's got one chance. Again, very inspirational for gaming, but also just inspirational in general. What can you do when you just go all out? Number 1 on my list of my top 10 fantasy movies, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It is not a historical epic. It is not strictly a comedy. It's a fantasy movie. Swords, sorcery, wizards, enchanters, swordplay. One of the most quoted movies of all time, certainly one of the most quoted in my life. I had a professor when I was at Concordia University, Reverend Rosenblatt, taught Christian apologetics and confession. And you couldn't be in his higher level classes if you could not quote Monty Python and the Holy Grail beginning to end. He'd have seminars at his house. He'd watch it with as many people as needed to see it, so they would learn it, so they would get it, so they had that background, that sheer weight of cultural background that this movie forms. Oh, it is funny. I laugh my ass off each and every time. You don't find a funnier movie than Monty Python and the Holy Grail. At the same time, what Excalibur took the Arthurian legend and gave it this scope and this grandeur and this gleam. And it was wonderful. Monty Python and the Holy Grail threw it into the mud and dragged it around for a little while. Picked it up and loved it and mocked it all at the same time. It turns every trope that we would eventually have that didn't exist at the time that that movie was made. It would take all of our fantasy tropes and put them on their ear. We have tropes in fantasy just because of things that were mocked or made fun of in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Things that were funny, things that were eye-opening, surprisingly. The dialogue was brilliant, well written, spectacular. Just the dialogue, just the comedic dialogue and how they handled language and interplay. The absurd introduction of modern elements into a very well-known, well-understood, set period in history. Things that made no sense, that had no right to be there, that had no right to exist in that legend, that now are in our minds and our culture, absolutely a part of it. Monty Python and Holy Grail, my #1 fantasy movie of all time. But this is a +1 list, so I have to have one more movie that is in my top 10. My top 10 +1. And for my +1, I am going to go to 1988's 1988's Willow. George Lucas's vision of a fantasy world. Oh, God. I've seen Willow once. It's as many times as I needed to see it. If it comes on again, I'll watch it. If it's in front of me, I will stop. And I will watch it through. Not that I don't really want to see it again. That's not the case. It's that I don't have to. It's that there was so much detail. So well laid out. So well played and so bonkers. Oh, this character, Willow, he's a hobbit. I don't even remember what they called him in the movie. He's a hobbit. He's got to take a human baby someplace. And he runs into all these characters, including Val Kilmer in his prime as Mad Mardigan the Fighter. And watching that sheer dexterity and cockiness, and how many characters have I had since then who were in some percentage themselves Mad Mardigan. And the casual, simple toss-off bits of magic that just exist, and the bizarre characters. It was supposed to be a new vision of good and evil, and no, it was very archetypal. George Lucas has always believed in displaying the archetypes, and very Jungian theory, and Willow is no different, but it was so well done. Because you could tell they cared, and they acted like they cared, and they produced it like they cared, and yeah, magic, swordplay, fighting, fight scenes, swords. Everything looked sharp, everything looked deadly, everything. There were some new designs. The over-under crossbows, those are brilliant. I love those. I mean, you got to engineer a little bit about how they're going to work, how you keep the quarrel in place when you've got it on the underside of a inverted crossbow, and do you flip it to fire, or can you just fire over under from the same trigger, which I believe was the case, and how do you get that to work? And it's not impossible. Made me think, made me imagine, it inspired me. And that's, the key. The majority of these, you might have noticed the theme. These are movies that have inspired me, that still inspire my thought in the fantasy genre. There's a little Court Jester, Excalibur, and Forbidden Kingdom in everything that I do when I run D&D or try and write a fantasy supplement. It's, these are the foundation. I want to thank my lovely assistant, Devin, for doing the research, giving me the graphics that I've been using, and the dates of these films. Everything else is from out of here. It is my top 10 +1 list, after all. Thank you, Ren, for the suggestion. I enjoyed doing this video. I'm doing a little work and researching it and getting it up. I've gotten some more suggestions off the last video. I'm going to be, feeding off of those for a little while. Feed me more. If you'd like to see me talk about something, leave me a suggestion in the comments. I love getting suggestions, and I probably will end up getting most of them, if not all of them. Thank you for your time and your attention. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it very much, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have fantasy movies that you think I would enjoy that I didn't put on this list but might have seen anyway, give me in the comments. Let me know what your favorite fantasy movies are and why. If you'd like to see these videos as soon as they come out, maybe give me a little bit extra reach here in YouTube land, subscribe. I like getting subscribers. That's the number that I check most often when I'm here checking things on YouTube. If you really dug this video and like to see more quality custom content, if you'd like to see me stretch a little bit, if you'd like to see me get a couple of lightsaber fights in as Uncle Drac, which would be really cool, please feel free to visit my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/ScottCorum and consider donating. Everything helps and pushes me forward to make a little bit better every time. Thank you again for watching. In the meantime, I am Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me, and I will see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.